Artist, I'm going to show you how to glaze a ceramic project. If you glaze a ceramic project, it's going to have to go in the kiln one more time. We waited for our clay to dry, we put it in the kiln, and then it came out, and now it is a little bit sturdier. You can see that the color has changed just a little bit. You have two choices now. You can either paint this, you can do a lot of other techniques with watercolors or oil pastels, and your other choice is to glaze this. One reason people might choose to glaze something is if they want it to be dinner safe. So if they made a cup and they wanted to be able to drink out of it, or a bowl and you wanted to be able to eat out of it, you would want to use a dinner safe glaze. Glaze is going to be glossy and glassy when it's finished, but the only setback is that you do have to put it in the kiln to be fired again. One of the trickiest things about glaze is that the color that it looks in the container is not the same as it looks when it is fired. So this glaze is called peach, and when we look at it through the bottle, it doesn't look like it is a peach color, and when we open it, it looks like it is kind of a lilac or purple color in there. But if we check out our key on the top, it shows us that peach is going to kind of be a light pink color. So you always want to make sure that you double check your keys before you decide what you want to use. This one says dark blue. We can see that it is a much darker blue when it's fired compared to what is in the bottle. When you are using a glaze, the very first thing that you want to do is make sure that the container has been shaken up. I've already done that for you. If you can listen, you can hear the glaze, that it's a nice consistency, that it's shaking up in here. Sometimes glaze dries out and you don't hear that shake of the liquid in the jar. That means it's not going to be ready to put on. There are a few rules when it comes to glazing. Glazes are very expensive. Something this size might cost $22, so we don't want to waste this glaze. That's one reason why I don't like to pour glazes out into a cup before using. I like to just use it directly from the jar so that way none is wasted. But it's really important that we don't mix the glaze colors, that we're always using a clean brush when we're applying our glazes. And we don't want our brush to have a lot of water in it because we don't want to affect the consistency much. A lot of times artists ask, can I paint and glaze? Because I like the dark blue and I like the peach, but I don't see any white or black or orange, and I want to add those here. The answer is yes, but you can't do them both at the same time. We can't paint something and then put it in the kiln. So we would do our glaze first. It would go in the kiln and get fired, and then when it comes out, we could then add our paint. So I'm going to use these two glazes on these two parts of the bird, and then when it comes out of the kiln again, I could then add paint for the other areas. There's one big rule when it comes to glazing, and we cannot glaze the bottom of our project. If we glaze the bottom of our project, it could get stuck to the kiln shelf, because when this goes in the kiln, the particles fuse together and it could get stuck to the kiln shelf. So nothing can be glazed on the bottom, on the thing that would sit on the shelf. We want to use a soft bristled brush when we do our glazing. And we just basically want to brush it on in a dab technique. So we don't want to brush the glaze on, we want to dab. And we're being gentle with this soft-haired brush, so we are not stabbing that brush into our clay project because we don't want to ruin the nice soft bristles. So I'm going to start with this dark blue. It's already been mixed up for me. And I'm just going to dip my brush right in, and I'm just going to start dabbing the area that I want to be dark blue. Now this glaze is going to dry relatively quickly, which is good because you need 2 to 3 nice coats of glaze for each color. So I'm going to finish dabbing this area, and just make sure that you have enough glaze on your brush that it's getting into any of those cracks or creases that you have used if you added any texture. So this is the first coat. And you can kind of see that what happens when it starts to dry is it looks almost chalky. So once this glaze has dried to this chalkiness, I will know that I'm ready for layer number 2. Now that I can see that my first layer is pretty much dry, I can add my second layer, and I'm doing the same thing. I am dabbing and I am just going right on top of what I've already laid down. This is coat number 2. And remember, you need 2 to 3 coats to really get the nice bold color of that glaze. So I'm going to let this one dry, and then I will add my third coat. Once you are done with the 3 coats of your first color, you can then move on to a second color. But remember, we do not want to contaminate these clay jars. So use some water and really clean out your brush. You can see that I still have some glaze along the handle, so I'm going to want to get a paper towel and really clean all of that glaze off of my brush. I'm being very careful with the bristles of my brush, but it looks like I did a pretty good job. And notice that it's not a soaking wet brush because I don't want to contaminate the peach color with a lot of water. So I would just repeat the same process that I did. My peach has already been shaken up. I am dipping my brush in, and I am dabbing into the areas that I want glazed. Remember, I am careful not to put any glaze on the bottom of my project, and I'm trying really hard to keep it separated over here, but because this is dry already, I don't have to worry too much about contaminating my brush because that other blue glaze has already been dried. So I would repeat this process, and I would do 3 coats, letting each coat dry in between each application. So I'm going to go ahead and pause and catch up. If you accidentally get glaze somewhere that you don't want it to be, so I got a little bit of glaze here on the beak, you can just take a damp paper towel or a damp sponge and just wipe that glaze away. This is also what you would want to do if you accidentally got any on the back of the project. So I got some right here on the back. Remember, we can't have any glaze on the back. So a damp sponge or a damp paper towel would wipe that away. Now the next step is for this to go back in the kiln for a second firing before coming out.